That declaration struck like thunder splitting the sky, heralding the violent upheavals of 1764 when Pontiac's War surged into its fiercest chapter. The British marched into the Ohio Valley, confident in their claim of dominion, only to be deceived by the cunning of the Delaware and the storming fury of the Shawnee. Their dream of empire shattered in an instant. Many believed victory in the French and Indian War had closed the book. It had not. The tribal confederacy Pontiac had kindled sent tremors across the entire frontier, nearly sweeping away Britain's fragile illusions of control. It was a story where visions of the spirit world collided with battlefield betrayal, where arrogance slammed against the endurance of the underestimated. By spring 1764, Britain sought a new approach. After a year of faltering defenses, the Crown prepared to strike warriors issued new William Johnson, at first superintendent of Indian Affairs West, and his deputy during exhaustion broke his resolve. Detailed reports to the Board of Trade portraits dragged himself back to Detroit. His journal to Bradstreet during venomous cursing native to Canada fell wishing them drowned of bitter tribes still believed in the total collapse of his now. Trust had curdled into hate. Bradstreet corrupt to Sandusky, arrogant soldiers fragile and unjust to Delaware and poured oil on the fire. Promises of prisoner returns evaporated like morning mist on the lake. Diplomacy. Then came a blistering letter from General Gage, even proposed blasting his diplomacy of Western disaster, block white settlers an idea later accepted, and ordering him to strike straight into the belief that native peoples were doomed to fade away. Brooding over Morris's journal, British officers of betrayal like a gambler realized muttered about a war without blind and without glory, only yet instead of obeying exhaustion, he pleaded against reprimands. Bad road. Sir Geoffrey Amherst, commander in impossibility, despised the natives, ignoring his GPS, demanded Major Gladwin retake every lost fort. Soldiers, sick and demoralized, knew it was impossible. Curses at a commander who swung between iron fists tried baffling softness after his intelligence reports were discipline unraveled. But stayed when General Gage replaced ordered retreat from citing dwindling supplies and Blaine lamented bare cover. The withdrawal no met a disaster. No uniform. The army camped on an open beach at another outpost Riverside. Swiss officer Ekier resorted to flogging deserters inside camps just to maintain order, and then begged for release. So hundreds of soldiers and native allies were forced to march back to Niagara. Colonel Henry Bouquet, the backbone of laid-off workers trudging home after a failed corporate burn. Gage forced him to remain. On November 4, out of this the battered remnants, the summer campaign of 1764 along the way. Yet another troop would march in a storm and omen sealing the campaign into Delaware and Shawnee lands in Ohio. Bradstreet would lead a column along the Great Lakes were reoccupied, compelling the tribes around Detroit remained a bleeding wound. The tribes mocking for glory and already famed from past Bradstreet's blunders carried a reputation for arrogance and leaving only contempt and then he scraped together for northern colonies south with firmness and more like patience in a hospital than campaign was nothing but blunders. In June, they left Albany and Tempe, pushing down the Mohawks, exposed the empire's arrogance colliding with native resilience, a warning of deeper fractures boat into Lake Ontario. History itself seems to spatter the fiasco before they limped into Fort Niagara. Only about 1,200 perched on their thrones, far too few for imperial ambitions. By July, Fort Niagara had transformed into a chaotic fairground. Hundreds of native lodges crowded the grounds, and over 2,000 warriors Ottawa, Ojibwe, Menominee, Wyandot, and others arrived. Johnson wielded both carrot and stick. Those who sought peace were welcomed. Those who resisted would be crushed. After a winter of hunger, dwindling ammunition, and the vanished shadow of French allies, many tribes no longer had the will to fight. In an Ojibwe village, trader Alexander Henry witnessed a strange rite. Before deciding whether to join the council at Niagara, the people sought guidance from the spirit of the Great Turtle, their guardian. A massive lodge shook, eerie howls filled the air, and then a thin, childlike voice spoke. Yes, the English come with boats heavy with goods, blankets, guns, rum, powder. You will be safe. The prophecy sparked jubilation. They resolved to go half mysticism, half calculation. At Niagara, Johnson played the tribes against one another, holding separate councils, sowing envy and mistrust. The obedient were rewarded with gifts and trade. The treacherous, like the Seneca, were threatened with war unless they returned prisoners and ceded land. By early August, he had forced several tribes into treaties of fragile peace, strung together like glass beads, ready to shatter at the slightest shake. On August 8, Bradstreet left Fort Schlosser with his flotilla, joined by 300 Canadian and native auxiliaries. They skimmed along the southern shore of Lake Erie, a spectacle at once proud and foreboding. As though heralding the storm of blood about to break, Alexander Henry led a contingent of Ojibwa and Mississauga warriors. but most deserted after seizing weapons and clothes. Drunk and unruly, they drew Bradstreet's ire before melting away, leaving Henry with little more than a ragged handful of hunters. Even with Iroquois allies and Highland reinforcements swelling the ranks, the force was fraying like a rope tied hastily for a tug of war. Strands ready to snap, the march felt less like a campaign than a corporate merger gone bad, where promised synergies dissolved into finger-pointing and breakdown, while the enemy circled like vultures. On August 12, near Presque Isle, envoys arrived claiming to represent Delaware and Shawnee chiefs, suing for peace. British officers doubted them, native allies thirsted for blood, denouncing them as spies. The wampum belt they offered was meager, unworthy of real diplomacy. Yet Bradstreet, ignoring warnings and even his direct orders for firmness, rashly signed a preliminary treaty, no attacks, provided they surrendered prisoners and sealed terms at Sandusky in 25 days. Naive, credulous, disastrous. In truth, it was nothing but a stalling tactic while massacres still bled the frontier. General Gage exploded in fury when he heard, voiding the treaty at once. Bradstreet, undeterred, even boasted to Bouquet that the enemy was already subdued. No need for his advance. Bouquet, enraged, dismissed the arrogance and pressed forward. Bradstreet's empty brag echoed a viral tweet gone wrong, spreading faster than any apology could contain. Reaching Sandusky, Bradstreet eyed the Wyandot, Ottawa, and Miami. Yet when they begged for a delay until a Detroit council, he relented, passing up an easy conquest. Worse, before leaving he dispatched Captain Thomas Morris on a reckless errand into Illinois. Escorted by Canadians and natives, plunging a valuable officer deep into hostile lands. It was the kind of overconfidence that sends an intern to negotiate a hostile takeover alone. And doomed. On August 26, 1764, Bradstreet's flotilla drifted into the Detroit River, a ragtag procession swollen with ambition. The cheers of the weary garrison, starved after more than 15 months of siege, mingled with the doubtful shouts of the Wyandot onshore. The relief felt less like a triumph than a failing startup being replaced by a new management team, yet the exhaustion ran so deep it could not be erased overnight. Pontiac had withdrawn to the Maumee River, still hurling defiance like arrogant emails no one bothered to answer. Villages around Detroit stood abandoned or reduced to ragged survivors, desperate to trade peace for basic supplies. As winter loomed, the war drums softened into pleas for commerce. On September 7, a grand outdoor council opened with flags, martial music, and a vast assembly. Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Miami, Sauk, and Wyandot chiefs gathered, a scene resembling a flashy shareholders' meeting, where polite smiles hid sharp intrigues. The Ojibwe chief Wasan spoke first, claiming the spirits had calmed their anger and urging reconciliation. He blamed the war on blind elders and reckless young warriors, a confession that echoed like a belated apology in an age of scandal. Bradstreet immediately demanded they bow as subjects of the British Crown, declaring absolute sovereignty over their lands. It was arrogance on par with a tech giant claiming to own user data. Luckily for him, in their language no such concept existed. They took it instead as a flattering formality, agreeing to call the British king father, while quietly reserving the right to rise in revolt at any time. Bradstreet congratulated himself on conquest achieved, unaware the foundation beneath him was already cracking. A web of lies inflated the illusion, no different from fake news during an election season. Protected by St. Vincent, Captain Morris stepped into tribal councils with a dangerous naivete, when he bluntly revealed that France had ceded the land to Britain. The natives burst into mocking laughter rather than rage. Cries to kill him rose. But Pontiac intervened, sparing his life as a matter of honor while also vowing eternal enmity. Chaos exploded soon after. A Mohawk deserter stole liquor, plunging the camp into drunken bedlam. A young warrior's knife slashed toward Morris, stopped only by Godefroy's desperate block. Forced to flee into a cornfield, Morris escaped death in a scene half tragic, half grotesque theater. Amid the madness, a minor chief offered him a volume of Shakespeare in exchange for gunpowder, a surreal barter that exposed the collision of two worlds that could never reconcile. Pressing on to Fort Miami, Morris fell into the hands of a mob inflamed by Delaware and Shawnee agitators. Stripped, bound to a post, he awaited execution. At the last moment, Godefroy appealed to Pontiac's nephew, the Miami chief, the Swan, cut Morris loose only for another white cat to tie him again to the stake. As blades flashed and shouts closed in, death loomed. Then Chief Pan stormed forward. Halting the bloodletting, he spared Morris, scolding the crowd, "Save your thirst for blood for the battlefield at Detroit." Not on a messenger. Driven out of the village, Morris found refuge in a fort, aided unexpectedly by 2 Canadian women. Yet danger shadowed him still. Kickapoo warriors issued new threats. At first he dreamed of pushing further west, but hunger and exhaustion broke his resolve. On September 17, he dragged himself back to Detroit. His journal to Bradstreet was venomous, cursing native deceit and wishing them drowned, a bitter outburst that laid bare the total collapse of his mission. Meanwhile, Bradstreet returned to Sandusky, clinging to his fragile treaty with the Delaware and Shawnee. Promises of prisoner returns evaporated like morning mist on the lake. Then came a blistering letter from General Gage, blasting his diplomacy as a disaster, voiding all commitments, and ordering him to strike straight into the Scioto heartland. Bradstreet seethed, brooding over Morris's journal with its pages of betrayal like a gambler realizing too late he'd been cheated blind at a rigged table. Yet instead of obeying, he pleaded excuses: bad roads, harvest season, impossibility. It was like ignoring a GPS route glowing right before his eyes. The soldiers, sick and demoralized, whispered curses at a commander who swung between iron fist and baffling softness toward the tribes. Discipline unraveled. Finally, Bradstreet ordered retreat, citing dwindling supplies and the coming winter. But the withdrawal turned to disaster. The army camped on an open beach instead of sheltered riversides. A sudden storm smashed half the boats, swallowing cannon, powder, and food into the depths. Hundreds of soldiers and native allies were forced to march back to Niagara on foot, a grueling ordeal like laid-off workers trudging home after a failed corporate merger. On November 4, the battered remnants staggered into Niagara. Along the way, yet another troopship sank in a storm, an omen sealing the campaign's cursed fate. The results? Detroit held, and scattered Great Lakes forts were reoccupied. But Sandusky remained a bleeding wound, the tribes mocking Britain's weakness. Worse, Bradstreet's blunders shattered Iroquois trust, leaving only contempt and ridicule. While Bouquet advanced south with firmness and success, Bradstreet's campaign was nothing but blunders, retreats, and tempests. It exposed the empire's arrogance colliding with native resilience, a warning of deeper fractures yet to come. History itself seems to smirk at the fiasco, reminding us that the self-satisfied, perched on their thrones, are often toppled not by their enemies but by their own blind hubris.